Energy has become one of the most powerful weapons in the global economy today. It is no longer just a commodity traded on price, but a force that shapes economic stability, political decisions, and national security at the same time. When energy supply tightens, factories slow down, inflation accelerates, and governments face immediate economic and political pressure. This is why energy has moved beyond markets and into the center of strategic power. That shift is already visible in current international affairs. One clear example is Greenland. Greenland has become a point of diplomatic pressure as the United States pushes for greater strategic influence, creating visible tension with Denmark and concern across parts of Europe. Because Greenland sits between the Arctic and the North Atlantic, its location is becoming increasingly important for shipping routes, surveillance capabilities, and military access as polar regions open up. At the same time, Greenland is believed to hold critical minerals needed for batteries, power grids, and energy transition technologies. This does not make Greenland a major energy-producing region today, but it does make it strategically significant in shaping how future energy systems may be supplied and secured. These minerals are increasingly central to how modern energy systems are built and secured, and as a result, control over future energy supply chains is now being treated as a core element of national strategy. This case shows how energy, resources, and security are now treated as a single connected issue. Without military conflict, countries can still apply pressure by adjusting supply conditions, shaping price expectations, and raising uncertainty around transport routes. Through these mechanisms, energy quietly reshapes political choices and strategic behavior. This is the reality of the modern energy system. Energy has already become a powerful weapon, so the question becomes unavoidable. When did energy begin to carry this level of strategic power? The answer is that energy has been used as a political weapon before. Energy became a political weapon long before today's supply chain debates. The first clear example appeared in the 1970s during the global oil crisis. At that time, major oil-producing countries deliberately restricted supply in response to political events. Oil did not disappear completely from the market, but even partial reductions were enough to trigger shock. Global oil prices rose sharply within a short period of time. For countries that depended heavily on imported energy, costs moved through the economy almost immediately. Factories reduced output as fuel became more expensive. Transportation slowed as energy costs rose. Household expenses increased, pushing inflation higher across multiple sectors. In many economies, inflation and unemployment rose at the same time, a combination governments were not prepared for. This experience revealed something new. Energy did not need to be physically destroyed or fully blocked to destabilize a country. Simply limiting supply was enough to disrupt economic growth and force political responses. Energy proved extremely difficult to replace in the short term. Alternative sources were limited. Infrastructure could not be rebuilt quickly, and dependence became visible overnight. As economic stress spread, public pressure grew, and political leaders were forced to react. From that point forward, energy was no longer viewed as an ordinary raw material. It was understood as a strategic resource capable of transmitting pressure across an entire national system. That lesson shaped how governments thought about energy for decades. But in the past, using energy as a political weapon required extreme actions such as full embargoes. Today, energy becomes a weapon in far quieter and more precise ways. In the modern system, energy is rarely cut off completely. Instead, supply is adjusted up and down, creating uncertainty that spreads through markets and governments. Pressure is applied through contracts, volumes, and price signals rather than open confrontation. At the center of this system lies dependence. When a country relies heavily on a single source of energy, even small changes can carry large consequences. One clear example is natural gas in Europe. For many years, European countries depended on Russian gas as a stable and affordable supply. As geopolitical tensions increased and political relationships deteriorated, Russia began to reduce gas flows, using supply adjustments as leverage rather than announcing a full cutoff. When that supply began to tighten, prices moved first. Gas prices surged across Europe. Electricity costs followed, and inflation rose alongside them. Energy quickly shifted from an economic concern to a national security issue. Governments were forced to respond, not because gas had disappeared entirely, but because uncertainty had entered the system. Europe's effort to strengthen cooperation with alternative suppliers such as Norway made this shift visible. Gas supply was no longer treated as a simple market transaction. It had become a strategic priority. A similar dynamic can be seen in global oil markets. When major oil-producing countries decide to reduce or increase output, the effects travel far beyond energy markets. Oil prices move almost immediately. Inflation expectations adjust. Central banks and governments face pressure as fuel costs influence interest rate decisions and fiscal policy. No political declaration is required for this pressure to take effect. Price movements alone are enough to transmit economic stress across borders. This is how modern energy weaponization works. It operates through dependence, uncertainty, and price rather than direct interruption. But supply and price are not the only tools that matter. The most vulnerable point often lies in how energy moves from one place to another. Energy does not circulate freely across the global economy. Instead, large volumes of oil and gas are forced to pass through a limited number of narrow straits and artificial canals, concentrating global energy flows into just a few specific locations. Because of this concentration, tension alone is often enough to trigger market reactions. Even without an actual disruption, prices begin to move as soon as risks increase, shipping costs rise, and insurance premiums adjust as markets respond to the possibility of delay long before supply is interrupted. One of the most important examples of this dynamic is the Strait of Hormuz. A substantial share of the world's seaborne oil exports passes through this narrow waterway every day, making it a constant point of sensitivity in global energy markets. When military incidents or political tensions occur in or around the strait, oil prices tend to react almost immediately. This reaction does not require a blockade, because the risk of disruption alone is enough to raise volatility and shift market expectations. Financial markets absorb this risk quickly, treating the strait as a permanent pressure point in the global energy system. Another example can be found in the Suez Canal. When the Suez Canal was temporarily blocked by a grounded container ship in 2021, global energy and shipping markets were immediately disrupted. Oil and fuel deliveries were delayed, transport costs increased, and supply chains were forced to reroute, adding time and expense across multiple regions. This episode demonstrated that energy pressure does not require military conflict or political intent. The fragility of transport and logistics can itself function as a weapon. In these cases, control is exercised not through force, but through exposure to delay, congestion, and uncertainty. This is why chokepoints play such a central role in modern energy security. They turn geography into leverage, but this story is no longer limited to oil and gas. As the global energy transition accelerates, the nature of energy weaponization is beginning to change. Even in an era of renewable energy, energy does not lose its strategic power. The reason is simple. Electricity can be generated in many places, but the systems that store, transmit, and stabilize that power depend on far more limited resources. Batteries, power grids, and energy storage technologies all rely on critical minerals and on the capacity to refine and process them at scale. This shifts the focus of energy security away from fuel alone and towards supply chains that are far harder to replace. In this context, places like Greenland take on new meaning. Greenland is often discussed not because it can immediately produce large amounts of energy, but because it is believed to hold significant potential reserves of rare earth elements and other critical minerals. At the same time, environmental concerns, limited infrastructure, and political constraints mean that development would take many years. This makes Greenland less of a short-term solution and more of a long-term strategic option in future supply chain competition. What matters is not instant output, but positioning in a system where control over inputs shapes who leads and who follows. This pattern is not theoretical. It has already appeared in global trade relationships. Tensions between China and Australia led to restrictions on the trade of commodities, such as coal, during periods of diplomatic strain. These limits did not require military action or formal sanctions to have an effect. They demonstrated how energy and resource trade can be adjusted to apply pressure and signal political intent. In the energy transition era, this logic becomes even more powerful. Minerals, processing capacity, and supply chain access begin to matter as much as oil fields and gas pipelines once did. The weapon has changed its form, but not its function. So the question becomes clear. What choices are countries making in response to this new energy weapon? The answer is already visible in how governments are reshaping their energy strategies. Rather than relying on a single supplier or a single route, many countries are working to diversify where their energy comes from and how it arrives. This means sourcing fuel from multiple regions, expanding the ability to import liquefied natural gas by sea, and reducing exposure to choke points that could quickly become pressure points. Another common response is the expansion of strategic reserves and long-term supply contracts. These tools are designed to absorb sudden price spikes and protect economies from short-term shocks when markets become unstable. At the same time, governments are investing more heavily in efficiency and power grid upgrades. By improving how energy is used and transmitted, they reduce overall vulnerability rather than simply shifting dependence from one source to another. Supply chains are also being restructured. The focus is no longer only on where resources are extracted, but on where they are refined, processed, and transformed into usable components. By spreading these stages across multiple countries, states aim to prevent any single bottleneck from becoming a source of leverage. Across all of these responses, a clear pattern emerges. Countries are no longer prioritizing the cheapest energy available. They are prioritizing energy they believe they can rely on. Reliability, resilience, and predictability now matter as much as price. But these choices do not come without consequences. As countries protect themselves from vulnerability, they also reshape the structure of the global energy system. So the result is a world that begins to look less like a single integrated market. It starts to resemble a system divided into overlapping but competing blocks. Looking ahead, energy weaponization is unlikely to become louder or more visible. Instead, it is likely to continue in quieter and more structural forms. Regulation will increasingly shape who can access energy and under what conditions. Export controls will be used to limit the flow of fuels, technologies, and critical materials without cutting supply outright. Investment restrictions will influence where infrastructure is built and which projects are allowed to move forward. At the same time, supply will increasingly be organized around alliances rather than global openness. In this environment, pressure does not need to be dramatic to be effective. Small adjustments accumulate over time, gradually narrowing choices for states and firms alike. The energy transition adds another layer to this structure. Fossil fuels still matter because they continue to power much of the global economy. Renewable energy also matters because it reshapes where electricity is produced and who controls the grid. Critical minerals matter as well because they determine who can build and scale new energy systems. These three pillars now exist at the same time, reinforcing one another. As a result, energy prices and political risk are no longer temporary disruptions. They become persistent features of the global system. Energy no longer sits quietly in the background of economic life. It has moved to the foreground. It has become a force that shapes national choices, alliances, and long-term strategy.